Steve, let's also talk about maybe a broader topic in terms of, it's one thing to know your options and have a general sense of what you're trying to get done. It's quite another to make sure that we're optimizing the performance as part of a design process for the device itself. And I think you would agree with me that it's really critical in our experience that early integration of the surface engineering functionality is really critical for long-term success. The sooner we can get ahead of this as part of the design process, the more we're able to optimize the finish or the surface itself as part of delivering whatever characteristics we're looking to deliver as part of that device. And I wonder if you could sort of clarify or elaborate a bit on this in terms of what you see people typically doing. The reference point here on this slide is the famous or infamous house of quality, and really just referencing the alignment with customer requirements, technology, benchmarks, competitive issues, and really it just serves as an illustration of how we integrate surface engineering into a typical user requirement or technical project. But if you could elaborate on that, Steve, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, in general, an engineer is going to be presented with a challenge. Here's a product, it needs to do these things. Let's find a specification, whether it's a specification for the material or a coating. And unfortunately, Corey, when it comes to medical devices, there is not a book of medically approved specifications for finishes and coatings. And when you look at all the variability we just talked about, you can see why that would be very difficult to do as well. What we see many of our customers do is choosing the military specifications. There's specifications for painting, for powder coating, there's specifications for anodizing, for all the different plating options. The unfortunate thing though, as far as an engineer thinking they can pick this spec and it's going to cover everything, is that these specs are centered around output. So an example would be the military specification for anodizing zeroes in on if you're going to use the hardest version of anodizing, measuring what the wear resistance is after you do the process. It doesn't tell you how to do the process. So if there's other things required from this coating, for example, the requirement for FDA approval, the requirement for validation of all the parameters of the incoming process, the inspection requirements, none of those things are spelled out in these specifications. And there's also the ASTM specifications, very similar in that they call out, for example, if you're going to do electroless nickel plating, the ASTM specification says if you have a surface exposure environment that's harsh, use this type of plating. It doesn't specify what harsh actually is. And then it says you should measure the coating by doing a salt spray test. And actually, that might not even be applicable to the medical device, especially if it's going to go through sterilization. Sterilization and salt spray are very different types of tests as far as how the part is going to react to that environment. So it's so critical that, again, during that discovery point in the engineering of a new product, that we can go ahead and look at the specifications that are available and maybe use them as a base and then supplement what the other requirements are of the product, so that not only does the finisher know what the output needs to be, but that the finisher can design the inputs that are required in the parameters and do the proper validation, and then move on to the proper production validation after the engineering validation is completed.
That's great, Steve. So it's really, I think if I'm to summarize that, it's really integrating your surface engineering group early in the process so you can really design the right finish for whatever the customer, user, and technical requirements are really being driven by the engineering team. So really reinforcing this point of integration early on in the process is key.
Yep.
Good. All right, so migrating on, that's a good segue to manufacturing. So one of the things that I'm always curious about is how organizations like yours control the consistency of any of the different types of surface finishes that you've described today. And I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on that based on your experience.
Well, we've been doing metal finishing for over 50 years, and during that time, it became very clear that we needed to understand the impact of all the inputs of a process, whether that's the equipment, the chemistry, and then how you not only control the strength of the chemistry, but how you keep the chemistry maintained. And we follow the IQ, OQ, PQ process for all of our processes. So many of our standard processes, we've actually gone through this. So we've done the validation. We understand what the limits are for the chemistry, what the limits are for fixturing the parts, what the limits are for all the different pieces that are of equipment that are used to apply the coating onto the products. And then what needs to be done though is back to the previous discussion we just had, what is special, different, or critical on the actual device? We might need to be doing some tweaking to a standard process. And in that case, we go right back through the IQ, OQ, PQ process again. And we would be doing the validation as we stretch the parameters of the process. Once that is developed in an engineering standpoint, and we've done the proper design of experiment and proven out the process, then the next step is to go to the production validation, where we basically scale it up in a production mode. And once again, validate the production equipment, validate how the chemistry is being handled at the production facility. And then very critical, what in-process inspections are needed to make sure we're holding the input parameters, and then also measuring the output. How do we ensure that in real time and on an ongoing basis, the product meets the requirements, and whether that's a specification or whether that's something specific that has to be tested on a, not only on a lot basis, but on a regular basis to control the process. And some of the different methods of doing that inspection, just jump ahead here, Corey, are normally with all the coatings, how thick the coating is very important. There's the potential that if the coating is too thin, it's not going to perform like it should. There's also the potential that if the coating's too thick, it could cause functional issues with fit when assembling the product or using the product. We talked about how the surface finish can affect how slippery or how grippy a part is. So we might have to actually measure it, and that goes beyond just looking at a part and saying, hey, it looks shiny or it looks dull. We actually could use profilometers. There's surface finish testing that's out there to actually identify what is the actual profile of the finish after the part's been coated. We talked about color. There's equipment called a spectrophotometer that will measure the color, and it'll also measure how much the color is shifting from the point it was desired to be. And normally that's described in a delta color shift. What we do with very color sensitive customers is make an agreement on what the maximum color shift can be. The human eye can start seeing about a 3 delta shift, and what we see is our customers are usually looking for a little bit less than the 3 delta shift. So you can't even physically see this, even if you have a good eye for color. That's where the spectrophotometer is critical. And when it comes to wear resistance, there's different wear testing that could be done to a product, but normally a referee method is used where a sample is run with the product so that the wear resistance testing can be done on a panel. The Tabor testing, Suga testing, these are some of the different names of tests that are out there in the metal finishing industry. Lubricity, when that's required for making sure the part doesn't get stuck and it continues to function freely, can be tested with coefficient of friction. This can be done on the actual product itself or on a referee panel. Doing testing in a cyclic chamber that might be adding high pH to the process, or humidity can be also set. We see customers that have real harsh environments designing their own test equipment at times, whether it's for wear or corrosion resistance.
Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the information you've shared on the options available for medical device companies in thinking about functional aesthetics for their components and devices. Clearly, there's a multitude of options available. And the key takeaway from my standpoint is the importance of finding the right team to work with, that has the appropriate level of engineering resources that can be integrated early in your development process, as well as integrated as part of your manufacturing transfer process. Steve, thank you so much for your time. For our viewers, please note that if you have any questions at all, or looking for more information on the various things that Steve and I discussed today, feel free to stop by the Surface Engineering Academy website. The link will be provided to you at the end of this video, and feel free to peruse the information and send us any questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Corey.